In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can easily extract General Ledger accounting data from either an SAP ECC system or an SAP S/4HANA system using Alteryx and the DVW Alteryx connector for SAP. Before we get started, a couple of things to note, particularly if you'd like to either download the workflow I'm going to show you from Alteryx Gallery or attempt to rebuild it yourself. There are three key prerequisites, very obvious ones, but I'll spell them out anyway. Prerequisite 1 is you must have Alteryx Designer. Prerequisite 2 is you must also have the DVW ACS for Alteryx Designer, and you can request a free trial of that from the DVW Analytics website. And thirdly, you must have access to either an SAP ECC system or an SAP S/4HANA system. If you would like to download the workflow from Alteryx Gallery, it's very easy to find. If you just do a search within the gallery for SAP, you'll have access to the workflow itself, and you can simply download it and start using it with your own within your own environment. Okay, so what I'm showing here is the transactional view of an SAP General Ledger document. It's what end users will see when they're working with SAP systems. And what's clear here, hopefully from the slide, is that the document itself comprises two components. The first is header level data, and secondly is segment or item level data. Now, why this is important is that the header level data and the segment or item data is physically stored in different tables within an SAP system, and therefore if I'd like to extract data from my SAP system into Alteryx and effectively recompile or reconstitute that document, then I need data from both the header level and also the item level. So what this means then is that I need to understand what SAP tables underpin the transactions I'm interested in accessing data from. And I'll start here, and our demonstration and workflow will focus on the two key SAP financial accounting tables. The first of these represents the accounting document header, and that's a table called BKPF. And the second represents the transaction item or segment, and that is the accounting document segment table called BSEG or BSEG. And what I've done here is I've just taken a snapshot from the data dictionary of both tables within the SAP system, and we can see that there are three fields that are common to both tables. They are company code, accounting document number, and fiscal year. So what this means is ultimately what I'll be able to do is I'll be able to use the company code, accounting document number, and fiscal year data to search for data within the BSEG table itself. Okay, so there's quite a tight link between these two tables through these three common fields. Now, if you're not familiar with SAP tables, there's an abundance of information on the web. Google is your best friend here. We've also put together a blog which is available on our website where we highlight the most important SAP tables for finance and controlling, and we spell out here the big two, which we're going to work with today, along with many of the other supporting tables that you might be interested in. So do take a look at that if you're interested. Okay, so let's get started then with the workflow. So what I've done here is defined a workflow that comprises two parts. The first workflow, or the primary workflow, is our caller workflow, and there's a second workflow which we're referring to as the callee workflow, and I'll explain why we're using these in just a second. But let me just walk you through the workflow itself. So this caller workflow comprises some standard Alteryx tools, as well as a number of the tools within the ACS for Alteryx Designer. And the starting point here is a tool that we call the SAP Logon tool. I'll show you the detail behind this in a second. But what we do within the SAP Logon tool, this is where we store our SAP system parameters, and we also capture our SAP user parameters. And the parameters and SAP system details are passed to any of the other DVW ACS tools that link to it. Okay. The second thing here is I've made use of the SAP table tool, and in this particular workflow I'm going to extract data from the accounting document header table. So therefore I've used the table tool, and I'll extract the fields that I'm interested in, and then I'll pass those fields in two branches. The first branch, I'll pass the fields I'm interested in extracting through to an Alteryx join tool. And then the second branch will pass these fields through to what we call our filter tool, which I'll explain in a little bit more detail in just a second. And then from the filter tool to an Alteryx macro, which calls this particular workflow here. And in our callee workflow, we also have the SAP logon tool, where we store again our system credentials, our user ID and password, etc., and pass those through to another SAP table tool. And in this workflow, we're calling the item table or the document segment table bseg. Okay, let's come back to the main workflow again. So what happens then is once data goes through the filter, is then processed within the callee workflow via this macro here, and then we get the data coming out of that secondary workflow into the Alteryx join tool. And what we're going to do here is we're going to combine the data from the header table, the BKPF table, and the item table, the bseg table. And from here, we've got another two branches. The first branch is just going to basically allow us to browse the detail of the extract. And within this particular browse, we'll just see the SAP technical names of the fields. And in the second branch here, we're going to convert the technical names into descriptions, so it's much more reader friendly, if you like. So let me activate some of these other elements so we can look at this a bit more detail. Okay, so let's start then with the SAP logon tool. Alright, what I can see here is I've entered my license ID, I've specified the system and user credentials. These are all encrypted, by the way. They're going to be used by the other elements within the workflow. Then we look at the table tool, and in the table tool I've selected the fields that I want to extract from the BKPF accounting document header table. So I've captured here fields like the company code, the accounting document number, and the fiscal year. So these are going to be important to pass to the bseg table a little bit later on. And then in addition to those key fields, I've also selected the fields I would like to have included in the output from the BKPF table. In this branch here then, we then pop across to our filter tool. And what the filter tool is going to do is do two things for us. One is it's going to determine which of the fields from the BKPF header table that we want to pass into the callee workflow through this macro here. So I'm going to use the company code, accounting document number, and fiscal year to help identify the data in the bseg table that I'm interested in. And what this filter tool is also going to do for us is going to batch up the request of data from that table. So what we can do here is, by using this idea of a batch size, is I can create batches to enhance the overall performance of the workflow end to end. Okay, so basically I'm drip feeding the data from the header table into the item table. Okay, I then call in the workflow. Which, if I just pop over here, we can look at the callee workflow. Okay, so using a macro, so through the input tool here, the data we're passing from the BKPF table, the header table, and our filter comes into this particular workflow via the input macro. I've also specified then our SAP table. Let's just take a look at this. So the table is bseg, so that's the accounting document segment table, and I've identified the fields that I want to extract from that particular table. I can also, in both instances, apply various filters as well. So I haven't done that here. I'm just choosing all the data, and then from this point, the data is extracted from SAP via the table tool, and then passed back to the output macro. So I get the output from the macro appearing here, and then I'm combining the two sources of data on a series of common fields. So this represents the company code, the document number, and the fiscal year. And from here, I can see the actual final output of that. So let's just take a look, make a bit of room here. Okay, so from here I can see the data from both the BKPF table and the BSEG table combined. So that gives me a complete picture. Now, as I mentioned in the introduction there, in this particular view, this particular branch rather, I'm just seeing the technical names of those fields, which isn't terribly user-friendly. So in the second branch, I'm making use of a select tool and a couple of other Alteryx tools to convert the technical names of the fields into descriptions, which gives me a slightly more user-friendly format in our output.